Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of history's most persistent and, let's be honest, fascinating conspiracy theories. The idea that the Apollo moon landings were all an elaborate fake. It's been more than 50 years, and yet the belief seems more popular than ever. So why do millions of people still think it was all just a giant lie?
Okay, so let's get right into it. To really understand this, we first need to look at just how widespread this belief is. And, where did it even come from in the first place?
It might surprise you. Actually, it'll probably shock you to learn just how many people are skeptical. A recent YouGov poll found that an incredible 21% of young adults in Britain, we're talking people between 24 and 35 years old, believe the moon landings were probably or even definitely staged. That's more than 1 in 5 people in that age group. It's a lot. So where did this all begin? Well, the theory really took off back in the mid-70s, thanks to a guy named Bill Kaysing. Now, he wasn't a rocket scientist or an astronomer. He was a former technical writer for a company that was a contractor for NASA. And based on what he himself called just a hunch, he went and self-published this pamphlet. This little booklet basically became the Bible for almost every single moon hoax claim that's come along since.
So, what was this hunch of his even based on? Well, Kaysing and all his followers focused really heavily on what they called anomalies in NASA's official photos from the moon. Let's take a look at some of the most famous ones.
Ah, yes. This is probably the most iconic piece of evidence that gets thrown around, the waving flag. The argument is pretty straightforward, right? There's no atmosphere, no air, no wind on the moon, so if that flag is waving, it must have been filmed on some breezy Hollywood soundstage. But the reality is actually way more practical and, honestly, kind of clever. NASA's engineers knew that a regular flag would just hang there limp in the vacuum of space. That wouldn't look great. So they designed a special rig with a horizontal rod that telescopes out along the top to make it fly. And those ripples? They're not from wind. They're just wrinkles from being crumpled up and stored for the 4-day journey to the moon. Once they planted it, it never moved again. Okay, the next big claim is all about the sky. The theorists argue that NASA couldn't possibly map out the stars accurately on a film set, so you know what they did? They just left them out. They went with a pure black sky to avoid getting called out for mistakes. But really, as any photographer can tell you, this just comes down to basic camera exposure. The lunar surface was absolutely blasted with bright, direct sunlight, so to take a clear photo of the astronauts and the lander, the cameras had to be set for daylight conditions. That means a fast shutter speed and a small aperture. The faint light from those distant stars? It was just way too dim to ever show up on the film. It's like trying to see stars from a brightly lit city street at night. And here we go. This is one that theorists often point to as definitive proof. They look at the shadows in the photos and see that they aren't all perfectly parallel. To them, this proves there must have been multiple light sources, like on a movie set, instead of just the one single distant sun.
But this is just a simple illusion. It's all about perspective. Think about railroad tracks, right? They're parallel, but they look like they converge and meet in the distance. It's the same thing on the moon. The ground isn't a flat studio floor. It's uneven, it's cratered, it's hilly. So shadows cast by a single light source can look like they're going in all sorts of weird directions.
Okay, so we've looked at the photos. Let's move on to the actual video footage. Because this is where the case against the hoax theory itself gets really, really strong. Could they have actually faked that famous bouncy moonwalk on film? To get why faking the footage was so hard, you have to understand the technology they were using. That live broadcast from the moon wasn't standard TV. Nope, it was sent using a special method called slow scan television, or SSTV. It broadcast at a super low 10 frames per second. Why? To save every bit of precious bandwidth for that long-distance call back to Earth. So, how does this prove the landing was real? Well, film expert Howard Berry laid out a really compelling technical argument. The astronauts broadcasted a total of 143 minutes from the moon.
To get that famous slow motion look, you'd have to film it in real time and then slow it down. But here's the problem, the huge problem. In 1969, the most advanced video recorders in the world could only store about 30 seconds of slow motion footage. To fake all 143 minutes, it wasn't just difficult, it was flat out technologically impossible at the time.
Okay, so the photos hold up, the video holds up, but what about the astronauts themselves? Could a human being even have survived that journey? Theorists love to point to the deadly radiation of space as this unbeatable barrier. The solution here is surprisingly simple to understand, and Professor Ojha at the Royal Museum's Greenwich has the perfect analogy for it: firewalking. You know how a firewalker can cross hot coals? They don't hang around. They walk across as quickly as possible to minimize how much heat their feet absorb. Well, that's exactly what the Apollo spacecraft did. It flew through the most intense parts of the Van Allen radiation belts in just a few hours, getting the astronauts through quickly and keeping their total radiation exposure down to a safe level. So beyond just debunking all the claims, there is a mountain of physical, tangible evidence that proves the landings happened, and some of it is still being used to this very day. This is so cool. The Apollo astronauts left special mirrors on the lunar surface. They're called retroreflectors. Why does that matter? Because right now, to this day, observatories on Earth can fire powerful lasers at them. And when the laser beam bounces back, they can measure the distance to the moon with millimeter precision. It is a live, ongoing experiment that proves we were there. But you know what? Maybe the single most powerful argument has nothing to do with physics or photos. It has everything to do with politics. America's Cold War rival, the Soviet Union, was locked in this incredibly bitter space race with the US. They had every reason and all the technical capability to track the Apollo missions. If it was a fake, exposing it would have been the biggest propaganda victory in history. And yet, they never said a word. In fact, they publicly acknowledged the American success. Their silence is deafening. And beyond that, the physical evidence is it's overwhelming. We have 382 kilograms, that's over 800 pounds, of moon rocks that are geologically completely different from any rock on Earth. And we don't have to rely on 1960s proof anymore. Modern orbiters from NASA, from India, from other countries have taken high-res pictures of the landing sites. You can literally see the lander modules, the rovers, and even the astronauts' footprints, perfectly preserved in the vacuum of space. So, if the evidence is so completely and totally overwhelming, you have to ask yourself, why does this conspiracy persist? Why, in some circles, is it actually growing? The answer, it seems, says a lot less about the actual evidence and a lot more about us. See, the theory really gained steam in the 1970s, a time when things like the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal had created this deep public distrust in the government. And as the author Oliver Morton suggests, the idea that the government was just pretending to be powerful enough to go to the moon, instead of actually doing it, that idea really resonated with a newly cynical public. And in the end, maybe the hoax theory sticks around because the truth of it all is just almost too incredible to believe. It forces us to look at what humanity was capable of when we were at our most ambitious. And so the question it leaves us with isn't just, did we go to the moon? The real question is, if we could achieve that then, what's stopping us from taking another giant leap now?